Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Weekly Wrap. I'm Seth Miller, the editor at PaxX.aero.
And I'm Maryann Simson, director of Apex Media. This week we'll be talking about a new passenger confidence survey. We'll also be talking about Taxibots in Holland, and Daniel Welch from Valour Consultancy is going to join us to discuss the outlook for the in-flight entertainment content sector.
But first, Maryann, did you catch the attempted SpaceX launch yesterday?
I tried to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I watched. They tried. It was pretty impressive. The stats I saw said they had more than 2 million people watching around the world across the different feeds they had running, which is a lot of people, a lot of interest in space, obviously. Getting humans back into space through a new launch platform is very cool. Great opportunity to practice the the scrub sequence. So I guess that's good news.
I guess that's good news. Yeah, and a lot of my friends were watching, people who aren't generally interested in aviation or space from a day-to-day basis. But I think the whole SpaceX thing, Elon Musk, Tesla, they're making space sexy again. This is a very sleek launch vehicle. It's a very cool uniform spacesuit. And I think the whole thing just has a certain prestige to it again now.
Yeah, and I will say there's high production value is where I'd come from with that. It's really neat to watch the SpaceX launches. I've been watching them for years now, and they keep getting better at doing it. Just the multiple camera angles, everything running live the whole time. It really does help make a spectacle of it in some ways, but mostly in good ways. It really draws people in, makes it interesting, makes it a good thing to be watching, and get people interested in space and science, which I'm a fan of.
I think so too. I was just reading some of the articles about the attempted launch yesterday, and I learned, first of all, the astronauts' names are Bob and Doug. If anybody out there's watching that's Canadian, that's quite funny. Bob and Doug McKenzie. I don't know if you... Strange brew? No, I can just imagine them going to space. It would be great. But one of the traditions that they have in the launch center is that they always make a bag of popcorn, and everybody there needs to eat a handful of the popcorn. They're very superstitious about that. And additionally, apparently nobody who's involved in the launch is allowed to wear red socks on launch day.
Well, I can just imagine, the idea of living in an apartment building. I still remember neighbors would pop popcorn, and I couldn't have any, but you'd smell it sort of wafting through the building. So good news, bad news on the popcorn front, I suppose. I guess this way at least everybody gets to have some.
Right. So moving along, one thing that did get off the ground, or something else that wants to get off the ground, is people. It seems Honeywell looks like they've partnered with a design agency to do a survey of just over 700 passengers and airline executives. And passengers seem to be optimistic on the willingness to travel. Close to 50% said that they are likely or very likely to travel by air in the next 6 months.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like 750 people online survey, sort of see what, buttons people click. The stats that I thought were interesting, I think we're definitely seeing a push for return to travel. Just even in the United States, we just had Memorial Day weekend, and the numbers went up, not surprisingly. We saw an increase in the number of people flying. So that's good news. It's nowhere close to back to normal. We're still under 15%, but it's coming back. What I thought was interesting from the statistics, though, there were two bits there. One is that by a 3-to-1 ratio, it's sort of a 75-25 split, roughly, that people felt in the airplane was going to be where they'd get sick as opposed to in the airport. And that's a big challenge for the industry, the airlines and the people running the planes especially, given that all the statistics that we've seen thus far and the real data suggest that everybody facing the same direction with seats between you and the airflow on the plane, you're actually less likely to get sick there than facing other people standing in line at security or at a concession stand or something else. I think it's more of a control situation. People feel like they're in control when they're standing out on ground and able to move around and go away somewhere if they needed to, as opposed to being in the airplane. But that one's an interesting statistic to me, and definitely shows some of the challenges that still exist in terms of trying to convince the public that it is safe to fly. The other statistic I thought was interesting is that it said people, something like 60% of people wanted some sort of technical solution to demonstrate that where they were was clean. And I don't know what that technical solution is supposed to be, or even sort of why it was proposed as an option. So that's going to be interesting to try to figure out how to deliver that, or if there's some other way to deliver that confidence back to passengers.
Yeah, that's going to be a tricky one. I won't speculate on how that might or might not work. And then just finally, another stat from this survey that I thought was really interesting is that we've got 48% of people say that they will feel comfortable to fly again when there's a government announcement, which I think is really interesting and really highlights the importance of airlines, associations, trade bodies, everybody working together with government bodies and government organizations to get the message out and have that message have consistency and clarity, so that everybody sort of knows flying is safe. So we've got a lot of work to do educating the public, but maybe educating our governments as well.
Yeah, and one other statistic building on that, IATA released a couple weeks back suggesting that, there's a lot of different places the message can come from. It can be your friends telling you they think it's safe. It can be the government saying they think it's safe. It can be, the airlines or someone else saying they think it's safe. And the real interesting statistic from IATA was that if all three gave that same message and gave a consistent message, the confidence from passengers spiked dramatically. So I think cooperation is going to be key in every sense of the word, and getting there will help bring it back to life.
Absolutely. All right, talking about in-flight entertainment content, we haven't touched on this too much yet in the show, but the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic has created a lot of major difficulties in the entertainment industry as well as the aviation industry. Obviously, film and television production has basically ground to a halt, and it's also affected the way that Hollywood studios and content owners are able to distribute the content. And considering that airlines are out of cash, this has really deeply affected the IFE content sector and the different types of companies and players who are involved there. So today, our guest on the show is Daniel Welch from Valour Consultancy. They're a provider of market intelligence services to airlines and some other industries as well. And he's joining us to talk a little bit more about this topic. Hi, Daniel. Welcome to the show.
Hello to both of you from Melbourne, Australia. Thank you ever so much for having us, and delighted to be a part of this weekly update.
And we're delighted to have you on as well. This week you guys have a blog post up talking about the impact of the pandemic on the in-flight entertainment and content world. And there's some talk about what the worst case scenario is. Can you give a little more color on what you really mean by that?
Well, I certainly don't think we're alone in expecting cleanliness to be a key consideration for passengers, especially those that travel in the next year or two. And I guess the big question is, will there be a subset of passengers that instead of using the embedded IFE screens on those aircraft that have them, will they instead choose to consume content from their own personal devices? And we think that's, there's a potential for that to happen. And that's really a worst case scenario for airlines that are spending a lot of money on early window content and want to get as many eyeballs on that content as possible.
And Daniel, how is COVID-19 affecting the decision-making process by Hollywood studios? And then beyond that, what does it mean for the small but really important out-of-home distribution segment represented by airline IFE?
Well, we've seen a couple of the big studios forgo cinema releases and deliver movies straight to the home. And I don't necessarily think this is a long-term trend for all content, but certainly something that we might see going forward for movies that aren't expected to generate a lot of revenue at the box office. Now, this raises a couple of key points for IFE content in the sense that with that particular content, it removes the exclusivity tag. And so, first of all, that raises points around pricing and whether that extreme price tag will still be there. And then secondly, in good news for wireless IFE vendors, there's an opportunity perhaps to stream that content direct to PEDs, again, because of that removal of the exclusivity tag.
And I know Valour is working on putting out a sort of 10-year forecast through the end of the decade of what the next big thing is, what the in-flight entertainment world's going to look like. What is going to drive the market going forward through the rest of this decade?
Yeah, well, we've been on with the report for a couple of months now. And one of the key topics that we've seen as part of the discussions that we've had so far is that ancillary revenues is a big focal point. Particularly as non-essential spend within airlines has been cut significantly. A number of airlines are now looking at ways in which they can really recoup some of the revenue and spend that they put into content a lot more aggressively perhaps than what we saw pre-COVID. So as we enter this recovery phase, the really big focal point is going to be on ancillary revenues, certainly.
All right, thank you so much, Daniel. Speaking of ancillary revenues, Apex and FTE are hosting their third live webinar event next week on Wednesday. So that's June 4th, and that's going to be centered all around ancillary revenues and what is going on with that, I guess, in the post-COVID world. There are still a few slots available for pitches to happen as part of that webinar. So if you've got a company or a solution for ancillary revenues and you think this is going to become something that airlines will want to have a look at in the post-COVID world, you can reach out to us. You can send an email to editor@apex.aero. There's a very short amount of time left to do this, though. So the deadline to reach out and talk about your concept with us is June 1st. Last week, Apex and FTE had their second of the webinar series called the Post-COVID Airlines webinar. One of the presentations I thought was really cool came from Aurélie Germain, who's the Director of Airline, sorry, I'm reading off my screen now, Director of Airline and MRO Solutions for Dassault Systèmes. I thought it was really interesting. So they actually used some of their modeling capabilities to help with the construction of that massive hospital that was built in like 10 days in Wuhan. And what they did is tried to model how mists, particles, virus, airflow would sort of go through the hospital's ventilation system to identify any risks or hotspots and how they should set up the hospital. And now they are looking to do the same for aircraft cabins.
Yeah, it's really neat to see the modeling, the airflow simulation, the fluid dynamic stuff come into play with the interiors. And obviously, again, going back to sort of what we were talking about at the beginning of the show and convincing passengers that it is safe to be on board, getting the idea of showing that, the airflow goes through the recycle into the HEPA filters and gets cleaned, and that the any particulates, any virus would be removed is really important to sort of build that. And we've also seen some demonstrations, some models like this showing that air circulates and is bad and, could create in transmission problems worse than things really are. So it is important to get this content out there, to get this idea out there, and to build the models to show that we really can, produce a safe environment for people to be in.
Yeah, and I think this works twofold. So it can be used to generate an animation or like a video, maybe a pre-flight video, to reassure passengers, show them how the airflow works, and advise them on best practice. But it can also be used to train staff. It can be used to inform catering procedures. It can help airlines model the safest way to have passengers standing up and going to the bathroom or other common areas. So it sounds like it's a win-win for passengers and airlines alike.
Yeah, indeed. Closing topic this week, I want to talk about Taxibots, because robots working with airplanes is cool to me. And the idea here is these aren't new ideas, but they're slowly getting adopted, and we're finally seeing that pace of adoption pick up. And the idea is the tugs that push back planes from the gate typically push it back, a couple hundred feet, couple hundred meters, whatever that is, and then the airlines switch on their engines and taxi out to departure. The idea behind Taxibots are they hook on, and instead of just pushing it out for, the initial pushback, they drag the plane all the way out to the edge of the runway or much closer before they sort of peel off and return back to the gates. And the idea there is they're electric vehicles, they're low emissions, they use no fuel, and they provide a much more efficient way of getting the planes out to the taxiway to save on fuel burn. They can be controlled from in the flight deck or with a driver on board or some combination thereof, which is pretty cool also. And Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam has had one or two on premises now for a couple months. They did a test with one of the low-cost carriers, I think back in April, and this month in May they did one with KLM. So it's one of those concepts people are definitely starting to take a closer look at to see if it could be something that really gets adopted in the industry.
Good. Well, I hope it does, and I'm glad to see that other places in the industry, people are still focusing on sustainability and looking to the future.
Absolutely.
All right, well, that's all the time we've got for the weekly wrap this week. I'd like to thank our sponsor, West Entertainment, for supporting the show. Thank you, Seth, for joining us.
My pleasure.
And for all of you guys at home, thanks for watching. Please click subscribe if you like this video and other aviation stuff. Check out both of our websites, and you can follow myself and Seth on social media. We'll catch you next time.